Look at that guy and his terrible eyesight.
All right. One eye bigger than the other.
Do it. 1, 2, 3.
There we go. Well, hello, and welcome to my Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft whiskey is king. We are happy to have you with us tonight with our good friend Alan Bishop. We're going to be talking about some practices that kind of got us up to the point of distilling or just stuff in that timeline of things. But before we go any further, I want to thank everyone in the chat for being on time, being early. And since it's kind of a freebie night, I want to know what everyone has in their hands to drink this evening. And if you're going to be drinking out of a nice little glass like this, that I do have something from Alan Bishop in it, or just because it's been that type of day, I'm going to go out of the bottle.
There you go. Amen. Amen.
So let's know what you guys are having. But Mike, before we go any further, do you want to handle our announcements for the Bar Cart Co-op?
I can do that.
Beautiful.
I'll do the clickies. How's that?
I love it.
We are proud members of the Bar Cart Co-op, which is a collection of friends who create content for the whiskey and other distilled spirits public. The oldest of the shows, and probably the one that explodes your head, almost number one, Distiller's Talk, which comes out about the end of every week, and it is a very deep dive conversation with people not just in the distilling industry, but distillery adjacent. And I cannot talk tonight. Also, along with that, the one that I think really blows my mind, One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, which comes out whenever Alan feels like it, because he's answering your questions. He's putting your questions to test. He's putting your methodologies to the test, from grains to equipment, and just about anything that you can think of around distilling. The sexiest voice in the business, Mr. Kevin Rose and Drew Crawley of Bourbon Turntable, which comes out on Wednesdays. And they have a very special live show coming out this Wednesday with Bourbon House. They don't do live shows very often, so this should be pretty fun. Bourbon House, listen to them on Spotify or wherever you get your music and check them out. We also I'll let Alan talk about this one because I'm not sure that I describe it properly. So if you wouldn't mind describing this show.
Yeah, this is sort of my paranormal / Fortean esoteric high strangeness show that I've been talking about doing for years on other people's podcasts and never thought I'd actually get around to doing, but I did. And it's, I don't know, we cover a little bit of everything from obviously ghosts and hauntings, which really isn't our focus, but to UFOs and, interdimensional things. And, we're getting ready to get into the Book of Enoch and Book of Giants, Book of Jubilees, all that good stuff. So it's just sort of a passion project for me.
Awesome. That's way better than I describe it.
It's that other podcast with Alan on it.
No, I usually describe it as paranormal, and about spirits, but not necessarily distilling spirits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And trying to explain the things that we can't quite explain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Serbian vampires, that sort of thing.
The Giants thing is exciting now for a lot of people.
Those are really, really good, like those stories, and there's a lot of those things that as you tell the stories of the Serbian vampire, where you're like, that really makes a lot of sense, and it's also really creepy.
Those are the ones that are the most fun too, because I always accidentally find them. Like because I always try to have at least an hour, and then I'm like, fucking, I got 45 minutes, and then I accidentally stumble into a story, and then I'm like, oh well, let's go there, let's do that thing. So.
We had one this week. So I was in Oklahoma this weekend, and it was an old, I'll call it an old camping and hunting club. And so my friend that was bringing me back said that there's a lot of stories about that facility down there, including people who they were old members, and they had one instance where someone had They were in a completely different town, passed away, and someone who was near where this person used to sit in the main lodge all the time saw them in a rocking chair at the time that they died, at X number of miles away. Then another one, there was a lady who was very famous for being on the grounds and always wore a red sweater. Always around her, everyone knew her as a lady with a red sweater. So one weekend, a guy brings his buddies down there. He got out of the car to go do something, and he got back in the car, and the guy said, "Who is the lady in the red sweater?" They never met this woman before. They never been around her. They didn't know any of the stories. And the guy said, and he instantly knew exactly what they were talking about. Yep. And apparently other people have now spoken up, and they're like, yeah, they see the old lady in the red sweater all the time.
Yeah, it's cool when you come across ones like that. And I've gotten to the point now where people are luckily reaching out about them too. And then I'll throw this out there because I'm getting ready to start on season 3. It'll be coming out at the end of May. But I have a story that I'm following closely that I doubt you guys have seen in the news, but you probably will at some point. So, and I know you guys are still in the intro, but I'll throw this out there just because you'll find it interesting. So here in Washington County, apparently around the time that COVID happened, there was some new DNA evidence that showed up from a serial killer who operated, from what I understand, back in the 70s. And he was killing Girl Scouts at Girl Scout camps. That was his thing. I guess the whole thing, whatever he was doing, right? They got a name for him. They never could catch him. And I guess about a decade ago, there was a gentleman who lived here in Washington County who was living in someone's garage who, when he died and they went to bury him and everything, they found out that he had used acid to take his fingerprints off. So apparently, very quietly, our sheriff's department excavated the grave back in 2019, sent off DNA. And I'm waiting to hear more on this story because obviously there's going to be some interest there. And we do those haunted cemetery walks and stuff all the time up there. So it falls right into that. So
that is interesting. Well, kudos to the police department for paying attention. Sorry. Not many people pay attention to that or would look back at it. And it's like, well, how many people take their fingertips off?
Well, apparently that's the other funny part of it too, is like, because the way the article read was like, they got new DNA and then they called Washington County about whoever this guy was. And they didn't say what they were calling for, but they wanted to know more information on this guy. And they're like, and I guess one of the guys on our sheriff's department was like, yeah, we were kind of wondering why he didn't have any fingerprints. Right. It just stuck in this guy's head for the past 10 years. So we'll see how that plays.
All right. Before we jump into the show, I know we had mentioned Bourbon Turntable. They're doing a live show on the 26th. Here's the link. It is for the band Bourbon House, who is actually from Wisconsin, down in Fond du Lac. And they're a good band. They just released a CD maybe a couple of weeks ago. It was within the month. But they're doing a live show. So that is definitely something to go check out because I think that's their first one with a guest that might be a live show other than us, people on the show or something like that, where we did a live show. But I think that'll be a pretty interesting one to jump in on, especially with getting extra questions you guys or the fans have in. So make sure you stop over there on Wednesday evening. It's at 7:00 Central. I know the thing says 8, but that's just to screw with you because he's in that damn Eastern time zone. So it's 7:00, people. You got to keep that Central Standard Time correct. So, all right. So thank you everyone in the chat for stopping in this evening. Thank you, Mitch and Mike, for being here. Well, Alan as well too. And I don't know, this came about because I was looking back at some stuff, and I was just we had talked about a few things off camera, and I was intrigued about things that kind of got us to the beginning of distillation, or even at some points now where you see things that might have been lost. Maybe there was distillation maybe earlier. Sorry, I like to think there's a possibility that maybe while everyone was doing perfume, there was some guy over there doing his own thing. I have that hope.
I think your hope is slowly being verified currently, honestly.
Well, it just seems odd to leave some things out. That's all. But I just wanted to touch on some of the things that kind of got us from here to there. And I know, Alan, you had talked before, I know earlier times in another show about the Scandinavian log for collecting yeast compared to other, basically propagating yeast in a different way that most people don't typically know about. You mind jumping into that? And I'm going to cheers everyone, because I think we should all have another drink before we get going.
Yeah.
Good for the
Yeah.
show. We're not sipping on anything. We're not tasting. We're not giving notes. So we should cheers, damn it.
Cheers.
I'm sipping plenty. I'm drinking someone's homemade orange pastis.
Nice. Yeah.
And it's good.
It's very good. Be easy with it though, because it doesn't have any wormwood in it. And the last time I drank it, I overindulged big time, and that might have been the worst hangover that I have ever had. When you start sweating the next day and you smell like anise,
Yeah,
like it's not good at all. So, but it is good stuff. So you want me to start with the Scandinavian yeast?
Well, I mean, you can start wherever you want.
Start anywhere.
You can start. I'm gonna,
Yeah.
like I said, I'm gonna kick off. I'm just in the sipping mood this evening.
All right. Well, I noticed that you were in like the falling down mood. I didn't know if we were headed in that direction. Like we're gonna remake that as Bar Cart Co-op. We're gonna option the movie rights.
You know what? It's probably not that expensive at this moment. I would think it's
true.
worth redoing. If
Might
there's
even-
going to be one to see someone tweak out on, there'd at least be a new set of scenes to have them flip out about. There'd be something else that could break someone's brain. That's a movie I could see redoing, actually. Yeah, I could call
McDonald's
that.
kiosk instead of the actual counter. Yes.
For the old
absolutely.
lady's trying to use the sign outside to order because she doesn't know how to do it.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm a traditional pot still distiller. That's my passion. That's what I love. I've worked that to some degree into whatever version of spirituality that people would like to ascribe to me, or I ascribe to myself one way, shape, form, or the other. And that's really part of what, if you have ghosts, you have everything is it's, as Mike said, sort of adjacent to distilling, because there are a number of things that I've been interested in as a distiller throughout my life, growing up in a moonshine family, and then becoming a commercial distiller, that were sort of adjacent to distilling, but inspired distilling. And I think that we have this modern way of looking at distilling, whether or not you're a distiller or you're someone who appreciates distilling or appreciates the actual distillate itself, whatever your approach to this whole hobby that everybody's into is, I think we have this habit of overlooking what distilling actually is, what it came from. And we have this very mechanized, industrialized, commoditized sort of view of what distillation is. And I think even a lot of craft distillers are unfortunately guilty of the same thing. And that's fine. Whatever they want to do is what they want to do. But if I can, to some degree, be some voice of, some antiquarian voice of, hey, that's not how all this shit started. And that's not really what it represents. And that's not really what it's all about. I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong with having a good time. Nothing wrong with getting a buzz on. And there's, as long as you're being responsible about it, that's fine. And that has its place. There's nothing wrong with trading bottles. I'm still going to fucking make fun of you. But I have a different view of this than probably most distillers and most even collectors, enjoyers, whatever you want to call them, do. And part of that is understanding that history. And that history is very tied to mystery schools and the sacred and the profane, and where distillation really started at. And there's sort of two different schools of distillation that we understand currently archaeologically. The first is the more Far Eastern school, which may have been as early as 600 BC in China. And that was certainly in 600 BC being used for beverage alcohol production from rice. Probably not very high alcohol content, but certainly being used and also being protected. That's one thing that people don't realize about these early distillation sort of societies. These were not everybody knew how to do these things. And the people that knew how to do them, they associated them in all aspects with whatever version of alchemy they had. And so you didn't just show anybody how to do this. You didn't just train anyone how to do these things, because they were almost they were practical magic in some ways, right? If you can create a liquid that is so super intoxicating, 10 times stronger than whatever you're making just fermented, and have that kind of effect on somebody, that becomes magic. If you can create something that's clear and it looks like water, but you can set it on fire and they can't understand where that came from, then that looks like your God favors you. And so therefore that's to be protected. It's not to be shared with everybody. And that's where a lot of these old distilling practices came from. Now, a lot of these practices are practical. They can be put back into use. They do make quality spirits for beverage alcohol, right? And if nothing else, if you approach them with the correct intent, right, the correct approach to them, whether or not you believe in any of the spirituality that comes along with it or any of the alchemy that comes along with it, etc., because your intent is correct, you're going to pay closer attention to what you're doing and therefore probably make a higher quality spirit, especially if you start to implement some of these older sort of forms of things. Sort of touching on the more Western side of things, where you really see distillation become prominent, not even prominent, but where you really start to see it be recorded in history, not only amongst the Egyptians, but also amongst the Greeks. We obviously know the Egyptians were distilling for perfumery. They were also doing very early alchemy. There are recipes that do exist for, little parlor tricks, such as distilling fermented eggs in a sulfur solution and a Moor's head still in order to color lead the color of gold. And it does work. That is a thing that they were actually doing. But that was never the actual role of spiritual alchemy. Spiritual alchemy was much more about transferring other aspects of yourself from lead into gold more than anything else. And there was also a lot of urine distillation, but that's a whole other thing. If you ever wanted to know what the actual Philosopher's Stone was, I'll throw that out there for those who are very curious and they want to look it up. It is based on distilling your own urine, just like making a plant stone, but you're making it from yourself. So get that out of the way because I get a lot of questions about that. Once you get into the Greek world, now you're really starting to see distillation become this like sacred and profane thing, though, right? It's very much associated with the Dionysian cults and the Dionysian rites and this idea of a green man character who's dying and being reborn. But it's not practical distillation for beverage alcohol. They're very crude distillation devices that are often used in the spring wine festival. The idea of the old wine being turned into distillate. The idea of the actual crucible itself being the earth, and then the distillation happening and the vapor coming through the heavens, coming across, condensing and turning back into a liquid, and the rebirth of the god of wine, the rebirth of fertility. But they would do things such as have a boiler with an open cross on it, to where there would be a cross, and then on each side it would be opened up and the distillate would just come out of it. They'd put it on parade and they'd light it on fire while it was distilling. So it's this giant flaming cross, right, in these parades of bacchanalia that are going on. And they start to come up with all these various other developments, such as the idea of baptism by fire really comes from this. So one of the things that they do early on for their converts is they would proof the distillate with a little bit of sulfur in such a way that once it was poured upon somebody, it could be lit on fire and it wouldn't hurt that person. So you'd literally set the person on fire and not hurt them at all. Or you leave it at high proof and you would give somebody baptism by water. So Dionysus went into the underworld to save his mother from the other world and emerged from the water. And this was one of the rites of the Dionysian cults. You would baptize somebody in water, and when they came back up, before they came out of the water, you'd throw flaming distillate on top of the water and they would emerge from the flames, right? That's the baptism by fire thing. And I mentioned all these things because these are not necessarily like the practical distilling things that we're talking about here, but this is the real root and the background of what distillation was, where it started at, etc. You sort of see that move down through the ages into more of the mystery school sects on the Christian side and the Islamic side as well. So the Knights Templar and the Cathars, for example, were both the Rosicrucians were all heavily involved in this art of distillation as a way of making medicine and as a way of creating sacraments. Even the word spirits itself is derived from the quintessence, the actual very spirit of the raw material that's being distilled. The idea that you can take an apple that was ripe on the tree, distill it, preserve all of its better properties, and then taste it and smell it again in January when there are no ripe apples. That's kind of magic of its own accord. So they passed this into Europe, obviously. It ends up in France for a long time, and then from there goes with the Irish monks up into Ireland. And this is where you start to see really cool things develop because you have sort of two different traditions coming together. You have that Gaelic tradition and the Gallic tradition. So the Gaels all being the monks and the monasteries, the learned people who knew how to distill, and the Gauls being, more of the heathens out in the heath, seeing these learned people and going, well, fuck, they're just taking the same beer that we're making and putting it in that thing over there. And then they got this stuff coming off of it. Well, why can't we take our stone beer, our Groots, and make that into a distillate, right? I certainly believe that was happening. I have no reason to not believe that was happening. It's why you see places like Lefroy into the 1920s were still throwing heather into their mashes. They didn't know why at the time, but it came from that Groot tradition. And that's exactly where you'd expect to see those Gallic traditions come in, is in that more remote part of the Isles, right, where it sort of hung out and stayed at for a long time, but very much so considered a holy or a sacred thing. The other thing that I wanted to touch on here too is I recently got really deep in the mezcal study, both from a practical distiller sort of standpoint, as much as practical as you can be, being in the northern United States, right, and not having agave growing in your yard, but just interested in the history of it as well. And so there is a growing mountain of evidence, and this has been studied going all the way back to the 1930s, for pre-Columbian distillation happening both in Mexico around Oaxaca, and then also down in South America with cachaça. They have found various vessels, just small ceremonial type vessels that very much so resemble the Mongolian style still. And if you still go to this day and look at mezcal production with the clay pots, the alquitar style pots without the serpentine condenser, and with just the bowl on the top with a spoon inside to catch the distillate, that's exactly what you would be seeing in Mongolia. And so they think that there's at least a presence of that maybe 60 or 70 years before Columbus ever made it to the New World, which is pretty interesting. And I suspect it's much older than that. I mean, we don't give our ancestors the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, I think we often look at them. We have this forward back view of history, right? And this is where you can get in all kinds of topics here. People get pissed off about different things in history, and it's fine, but you can't really look at history that way. Those people were no dumber and no smarter than we are. In many ways, they're smarter than we'll ever be, just in a different way than what we are. So for them not to have discovered distillation, I mean, you almost have that philosophical conversation, like who was smarter? Was it the Romans because they had the will, or was it the Mayans because they had the concept of zero? Which of the two is more useful to society? They both are, just in very different ways, right? So is this all tracking okay? Is this
you're right on par. And
yes,
I was gonna drop something in there a little bit earlier on when you were talking about it's kind of the way let's say the distiller, or throughout time, it's almost like the shaman, whatever the secrets are that are held, like you said, by the distiller or whoever it is at the higher point, when you're figuring it out, it just wasn't given to the most of the public. A lot of the times, even like depending upon the civilization, like the beer was beer or wine was like a ceremonial thing. It wasn't something that you had all the time. It was something special. But that knowledge, like you said, not handed down to everybody. It wasn't just the average person that had that. So I was gonna say it was almost like so like over time, it's like you almost look at that person as a shaman. If you wanted to, it's someone who has the knowledge. Over time, and it ages, you get kind of more into you're an alchemist in the Middle Ages, where you're manipulating in a different way, and you have a better knowledge of what's going on, but you still have the same concept of like background. If you were looking at it, it'd just be someone describing it from a different viewpoint.
Yeah, most of the useful fermentative arts in general, they all kind of came from people who would be considered shamans or witches or hedge witches, whatever you want to call it, depending on which culture you're in. You obviously see by the 1300s and 1400s, you see schools that are formed to sort of teach, distilling alchemy and fermentation alchemy, and they're all kind of male led up to that point. But a lot of this stuff started with females, of all people. Obviously they were considered the protectors, and it depends on what culture you're in. But you take, for example, something like absinthe. That's very much developed from sort of a green witch tradition in the Swiss Alps, where you had these basically granny witches, and we still have those today. There's people that we would call granny witch here in Pekin, Indiana, right? People that would know what you could use to take care of yourself if you were sick, right? And it developed from aromatic wines and brewing with those wines into a distilled spirit. And of course, you have the church move into that, and then you can't have females in power. So, you have the pharmacies move in and they take over from a male point of view. You have different traditions with fermentation across the world in general. Some cultures are very reverent about it, and it's important that you be quiet. You don't make any noise at all. I believe it's the Tarahumara Indians in particular. When they ferment, they don't want any noise around it at all, because it'll scare off the bogeyman, as they call him, the one who actually makes the stuff ferment. Whereas if you're in a Scandinavian culture, then you have to be loud, and you have to be raucous, and you have to have a festival, and you have to encourage things to get fucked up so that it'll actually do what it's supposed to
Get
do.
the action moving.
Right, exactly. But it's all related in some way, shape, or form to whatever one's spirituality is and whatever one's culture is and the way that they see those things. And I think that gets lost in translation. It got lost in translation with distilling, I think, fairly early on, because distilling got industrialized. It's a more recent art on a larger scale, right? So
Yep.
it's not like beer or wine where some of those traditions were able to hold on because of the long amount of times in between. Distilling went from, on a modern scale, a very, very small amount of people who knew how to do it to a very large amount of people who knew how to do it in about 300 years. So, it's a little, things got lost there, and I think they're still being gained. You still see some of this stuff too, out there. Like, if you look into mezcal production in particular, it's awesome to see. So when they're roasting their piñas, a lot of them, of course, have a little bit of a mixture of Catholic traditions plus local traditions. And whenever they actually cover up the roasting pit, oftentimes you'll see them do a blessing and put a cross at the top of the roasting pit. Sometimes you'll see them put a cross on top of the fermentation itself. I've even seen videos, and I would love to go at some point and actually see this stuff myself, but I've even seen videos where there were entire places of worship that were built into the distilleries, which I think is a pretty neat thing. Again, if nothing else, even if it doesn't mean anything to anyone else, or even if they don't believe in the spirituality themselves, it gives them pause, and they have to think about the things they're doing and make the things that they're doing have a little more intent.
Well, intent, and it does, and as you step up and, let's say, scale from going from something that was probably 3 to 8%, and there's maybe something that can be 17 to 40, the mind-altering substance or impact per ounce is going to be exponential. Like the first time you have this, it's going to, hopefully it puts you in that state where you're happy and want to talk to people and a little more jovial, especially if that's what's the situation you're put into. You're more likely going to have that.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it's just going from what you were having here to having, like, well, let's say if you had one full glass that was just beer and one full, you might be tore up by the time you get halfway through here now. So your experience is going to be accelerated, and you might not need as much, and completely different.
And it's a tool like that, just like anything else that God or the gods or whatever one believes in gave to us. Those natural sciences or natural plants, even. It's there to be used as that tool to open that door that you might not be able to normally open. And under the right circumstances, it's a positive. And when you start to abuse it, then it'll start to abuse you back, right? It punishes you a little bit, and that gets forgotten in the conversation too. And I don't feel like that conversation is happening in the distilling world that often. And when it is happening, it's always, this is just me, it seems like a bullshit conversation when I've heard other people recently talk about it. Not you guys, but you guys know some personalities I'm sure you've seen talk about being responsible with alcohol, and it always just comes off as, I have to say this, right? It doesn't ever come off as something they feel like they should be saying, but something they feel like they have to be saying.
Or they, not judging, but they don't have a story about it. But everyone has a story of someone that was drunk and fucked up and affected them too. So, I mean, that exists. To ignore that's pretty bullshit.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is like, so for me on a personal level, a lot of what we just touched on is sort of why I think, well, I even throw this out there. You get stories about haunted distilleries. I think there's a reason you get those stories, and it has more to do with the substance that's being produced, and not necessarily even human spirits that are connecting themselves to them. Although I think that at least some quintessence of human spirit can do that. I don't think the entirety of the spirit stays here, but some ideal of what a person was can stay here, I think. But there are other things that I do believe like to attach themselves to things around distilleries, because there's a lot of chaotic energy around a distillery, right? And you're opening yourself up to that whenever you are imbibing, and you can open the door for things to come in very easily. And I think that gets forgotten. And I'm sure there's people watching this going, "This is fucking bullshit," and it's fine. I don't talk about these things for them necessarily. I talk about it because I enjoy it, and just observations that I've made. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to ask a little question about with the clay pots. For because it's obviously you're not going to travel with a clay pot still because it's probably not going to survive the travel, but you're going to make another one because you're using your resources to make it. You have whatever compounds you've added to that clay that they'll take with them, but they just, all right, I'll mix it with the earth when I get there. But all of that was done. I mean, it was out of necessity because that's just what you did. Because that's what you had to do. And with them using most of the stuff that I've ever seen though has been clay pots, which I know still get used for some mezcal and some other stuff. Wood, but not really. The only time I've seen wood largely used was there's one of the rum distilleries uses a wood pot still.
Oh,
it was actually a wood pot still. But then, but as far as like when people started to figure out what was the best, because I'm sure people tried cast iron because they had cast iron pots. I can only imagine it probably did not do good things with the distillation, especially if it broke. But I mean, is there like known evidence that you know of like, okay, these people, they tried cast iron, found the problem with this. People tried glass, not a good idea. I'm sure everyone tried it once or twice until they realized it was not a good idea to have a bomb that would, shotgun pellet you when it went off.
Right.
But is there a point where they really know that, okay, this is when copper took hold, for doing the stills?
So it kind of depends on geographic region and the availability of copper. But I suspect that the copper thing was going on way earlier than we've realized. And again, bearing in mind that we're talking about very limited numbers of people knowing really the science of how to do this, why it was done, etc. So you wouldn't expect to find a lot of archaeological evidence very early on, nor, large vessels very early on. But if you go back to the Greek days, for example, a lot of that was actually bronze is what they were using for those early crucibles. You go back to Alexandria and you go into Egypt, you're going to see a lot of Moor's Head stills, very small glass alembic style stills. Again, not really necessarily being used for beverage alcohol production all the time. And not even necessarily always heated by flame. A lot of the mineral distillations, for example, or as gross as this sounds, animal distillations, distillers distilled everything for various different purposes. Alchemists did, but they were often heated using compost. They would take some cow manure and pile it up around the still. And if it took 2 weeks for it to distill off, it took 2 weeks for it to distill off. There is evidence of
the first peated whiskey.
Yeah. Yeah, right, for sure. Made with real cow chips. There's somebody watching right now going, man, that's a great fucking idea. I'm gonna do that. They've probably already been done. There is evidence in Sumer. There was a vessel found that looks a very lot like an aquatar that was carved out of solid rock, which is pretty damn cool. Various different people would use either wood or, you can use coconuts, for example. You could potentially, to make a joke of the Fred Minnick thing, you could potentially line a gourd with some sort of material and make a fucking still out of it. Not saying that anybody's tried that yet, but there might be a prototype or two of that floating around. The copper thing you don't really see on a wide scale until really you get into the 15 and 1600s, and even then that's not really wide scale because this is all hand hammered copper, right? This is not like copper sheets that you can really work very well without making the sheeting yourself. But by the time in the United States, you don't really see it until Revere comes along and starts introducing rolled copper that manufacturers can get a hold of and work fairly easily. And even then, you had still producers that didn't want to even use that. If you look at the Stanley Gypsies, their stills were built out of solid sheets of copper, the bottom and sides, like at Spring Mill. They'd literally cut a tree and they would start chopping at it or burning it and burn it into the shape that they wanted, and take a solid piece of copper, hand hammer it out into a sheet, and then hammer it into shape around that tree trunk, and then burn the tree out of the inside of it and tin the inside of it at the same time. Really just because by all intents and purposes, they were mostly show-offs from my understanding. They like to show off their metalworking skill. And that was one of the ways that, they got the local people to tolerate the gypsies, was if they're useful, then, they can stay outside of town over there and we won't bother them. And so, if they're better tin workers or copper workers than everybody else, then they got left alone. So
that almost seems like a good way for them to do it, because instead of them bringing their, carrying their forms to build the stuff around to say, yes, I'll build you this still off of this form, they could stay there longer if they had to carve the tree out and then wait for it to burn. They probably got an extra week or two of stay time on the outside of town.
Oh, I'm absolutely sure of that, for sure. And they were also renowned too for fixing copper and tin work. So if you had something that was made that was fucked up, you wanted those guys to come through town at least once or twice a year so you could get your stuff fixed, because you probably didn't have the materials to do it yourself. So excuse me. As far as go ahead, and whatever questions you guys have, you lead me wherever you want to go, and I'll go into more of the practical stuff as we go too. So.
I at some point I was just going to mention my little section I had with when I was in Peru with the chicheria. It's basically beer, but it doesn't get to the point of being distilled, or at least not at a high section if it ever did. But we were lucky enough to go to an authentic one. Sorry,
that's cool.
Shitty pictures, but if you're ever in Peru and you see a little red thing wrapped around the stick on the outside, that means it's a chicheria. So stop in and see what it is. We did have a wonderful guide, but when we got in here, very small, very authentic. Everyone's just basically a small building, maybe another one. Most of these are part of someone's house. It's basically an extended part of it. But the little clay pot on the right that shows a little bit of coppery brown, that was basically where they were keeping all the corn that was fermented. There was ones outside, but as they came to fruition, they were brought inside. If you don't know anything about it, they did this in the authentic style, which they chewed the corn, cracked it halfway, and then spit it out to start the actual process, because they didn't have the enzymes to break it down.
Yeah, use the alpha amylase in their saliva. Yeah,
to break it down and get everything going before they started it.
Mitch, isn't that what they did at Heaven Hill for a while?
I mean, they had a lot of guys that worked for them. I'm not gonna lie, big employers for a while.
How much spit do you produce on an average daily basis?
They thought that everybody was chewing tobacco, but really it was just that was their job with corn.
We're just hiring people with impediments and missing teeth.
They call it the Kentucky Chew for a reason.
Do you think you can hit it in this vat?
That's where the Kentucky drawl comes from, right? It ain't because it's
natural spring water. My ass.
Everybody's trying to speak through cornmeal in their mouth.
But so it is a little, I don't want to say daunting for some people, because it's a little iffy, but you forget it's been outside, it's fermented, it's been brought inside. We were lucky enough. This is Grandma. She was 83. And when I mentioned that kind of shaman experience, she did have other, relatives that were there that were learning it, that were younger. But you kind of got the idea clearly that she was the one that knew everything, and they listened to her and got the hell out of her way whenever she said whatever they needed. But they went through the whole process when we were there. How they're bringing it back in, boiling it down, kind of starting the whole thing and let it settle afterwards. Then, of course, we got to try some, and I was already half a glass in. Lady on my left there was one of the people who I don't want to say was learning, but I'm going to put it in that realm, because she was there. My wife and I, she obviously not afraid to drink it. And it actually was pretty good. But the two other ladies that were there, they were sipping Pilsner. And I'm just going to say, don't pass up on experiences like this, because we had her little helpers a little tore up by the end of the time. and quietly, they slipped over to a beer. Like in the middle of it, they broke open their own beer. They were mixing a little bit of 50-50 with some of the things they were making. So they were making their own kind of unique drink. It's thicker. It was a thicker drink rather than today's beer and everything that you would get. But it wasn't bad. It was more kind of like a thin milkshake would be the best way to kind of put that. But they do it out of red or purple corn as well too, and that's a little more well known. but that isn't always done the same way or in the classic tradition anymore. But that's just usually kind of like it was a yellow corn that they had. But just to actually be able to experience how someone was creating something, it was a great way to do it and stop and see that. And it was a step from A to B, and the way they did it, the ink is, a couple of places was used for just sacred ceremonial things. I was going to say it was, and also making it as a big thing, or making it correctly, because done incorrectly, they tested like 14 different distillery or chicherias and like 9 different provenance and stuff. And there were several that had what I'd just like to say quality control issues. Not that most people are there may have noticed, but on the grand scale, it didn't quite pass.
Questionable, yes.
Questionable. Yes. But if you had done it, the really good ones, no issues whatsoever. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just people doing things the right way. But it was unique because I never would have thought at one point that someone had. I always think this shit is crazy as how someone came up with something. Like, I chewed half my corn and I spit it out, and then we let it sit for 3 days or a week, and then we baked it, and fucking now we have beer. Like, this doesn't. I'm sorry. It just is, to me, it's unfathomable. Some of the things that people have come to fruition on their own. It's different when today where you have the built pattern of, the knowledge that it got you there. But just to make those initial connections was fucked up. I'm sorry. Credit where credit is due on some of that.
That's one that I wish I knew more about in general. So like, it's easy to figure out how someone figured out how to make malt, right? They left their grain out, it got wet, it sprouted, they tried it, it was a little sweet, did some things it wouldn't ordinarily do, right? Mead is easy to figure out. A tree fell down that had honey in it, it got wet, it fermented, they drank it, they got fucked up, right? Wine, same thing. The one that always got me was beer with adjuncts, right? Or like what we do in distilling, where you're using a proportion of malted grain and a proportion of unmalted grain. That takes some science, some serious science ingenuity to figure out how to make that work and how that does work, and how much enzyme, which they wouldn't have known what that was called, is in this malt, and how much of this malt does it take to go with this much raw grain to convert the starch in this raw grain into sugar, just like the malt is. That's the one that leaves me scratching my head all the time. But those sacred and ceremonial things are awesome. So the other one I didn't mention with mezcal, obviously people are more familiar with it now, but it's actually a tequila tradition, is pechuga. And this is one of those things that you still see there, obviously, where it's considered sacred. Now, there are commercial pechugas, but I don't think, it's just my opinion, I highly doubt the commercial pechugas that people are buying are really what pechuga is supposed to be. And I'm not saying that they're in any way cheating people of the experience of a pechuga, but a true pechuga, and my understanding of it and the research I've been doing, is a mezcalero may only make one pechuga in his entire lifetime. And oftentimes it's made to celebrate the Day of the Dead or various different other local festivities, shared with friends, family, neighbors, etc. It's made from whatever local fruits and spices are in season. And there's usually an animal sacrifice involved, usually either a chicken or, more often or not, a turkey. You'll hear stories about iguanas and snakes and stuff, and I'm sure that does happen. But oftentimes they'll make at least one in their lifetime, and they won't do anything with it. They'll set it back, and it gets served at their funeral because it has that reverence to it. And the idea behind it is that you've taken some of the spirit of this animal and infused it into the spirit, again, the quintessence. So the animal actually becomes part of the spirit itself because you've extracted part of the spirit of that animal. And that's pretty special, especially if that's an animal that you've raised yourself. And coming from an agricultural background, like before, there was a time when, not even a year ago, where I was kind of weirded out by this idea of it. Now I'm really intrigued by it. I'm like, no, this is the next level of distillation. And so one of the things I've taken to doing in the past few years for myself and for my own art, my own practice, and my own spirituality is doing these small little 3-gallon distillations of things that I consider sacred. And that could be Pechuga, which I just recently did one for the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute that I did the Sunday before Easter. And I did it with rabbit because I had a rabbit that I had killed and butchered. And I thought, hey, if you're going to Hoosier this thing up, Hoosier it all the way up, let's throw a rabbit in there and see what happens. Right. So Or, you know, we do absinthe that way. If I do a true Belle Epoque style or earlier, you know, 1700 style absinthe, I'll do it in a 3-gallon still because it's almost a solid state distillation. You'll have damn near 100 pounds worth, or 100 pounds, $100 worth of botanicals in that distillation, right? That's something special. It's something sacred that only a few people are ever going to get a chance to try. And that's some of the other practicality of these things too. So we talked about intent, right? And 99% of magic is in intent. So one person I learned a lot from was Mike Stallings. And Mike was always really good. He wasn't a commercial distiller, obviously. He was a moonshiner. But he was really good at understanding that there's a, and I'm not necessarily great at understanding this because I'm so obsessive compulsive about the art of distillation, but he was really good at understanding that there's a time and a place for distillation, right? And for certain types of distillation. And there's a time when you need to back off of it. And there's a time when it's appropriate to do it. There's a time when it's appropriate to teach people. And then the idea of intent as well, like whether or not you believe in anything to do with whatever signifier you want to use, be it crystals or whatever, right? Whether or not you think quartz crystals have any power to them. Maybe they don't. But if you take the time and you're going to run your distillate over those quartz crystals and filter over them or whatever, pray over those crystals, put your intent into it, and your intent being, you know, that people who imbibe the spirit don't ever hurt themselves, hurt somebody else. It makes them joyous. It makes them happy. It brings them happiness. Again, you're paying attention to what you're doing. Those are little practicality things, but now they're not actual practical distiller things as much as they are just paying attention again and having reverence and love for what you're doing. So
in doing that, and not to harp back on the clay pot, but I had a thought with it. So I know also that using the clay pot does give it a certain mouthfeel to it. But has anyone that you know of tried to do clay pot distillation of a whiskey, not a mezcal?
Let me think. So we did, Brian Cushing, myself, and Aiden Pemberton did a little 1 gallon double like that about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. It's on the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, but I did it with an air cooled condenser, which didn't work the best in the world. But it was kind of a proof of concept. And the idea would be eventually that if I can find somebody that can throw a clay pot that I can buy for a decent price, because the problem is it's going to crack eventually. I mean, sometimes they crack within 2 or 3 runs. I would be more than willing to try it for sure, but I don't know of anyone. I bet if you got down around Oaxaca, because that's of course the homeland of maize as well. I bet there are people down there distilling corn whiskey on clay pots right now. I would almost guarantee that somebody is doing that somewhere. So
I wonder if someone used what is it, like the Kamado or the Big Green Egg clay grill or pot, or what is it? Wonder if you could use one of those since it could withstand the heat from down below.
You probably could. I don't know. It'd
be very expensive, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of practicality with distillation, a couple things that I'll throw in is we don't necessarily have a great understanding of many of the spirits that we as craft distillers are trying to make. Everybody takes a crack at something and they think that they've done it the right way, but most of them haven't done the research, right? I was guilty of this too. Like, I mean, my early absinthes, whether they were at Copper and Kings or they were at Spirits of French Lick, even at Spirits of French Lick, I had a decent idea of what true absinthes were considered back in the 1800s, 1700s. But, you know, you can call something absinthe, doesn't make it absinthe. So going back and learning those old ways and seeing the ways that they were doing it, and you read through it and you go, that doesn't make any sense, until you sit down and you try to do it yourself, right? And then all of a sudden things start clicking in your mind. You go, this makes a lot of sense. There's a reason why they did this the way that they did it. And it's all about control. And again, part of that is just paying attention. So you look at the coloration step for absinthe and the 1700s, and what you'll see is when they were making a Verde absinthe, they were using 42 to 48% of their finished alcohol that they're going to call absinthe to color with. Why is that? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first reason is because those coloring herbs all have aromatics to them, right? And you can overdrive those real quickly. So better to have a smaller amount of it that you might have fucked up than to have a larger amount of it, and then you can blend back. The other reason is so that you're paying attention. So if the recipe says 42% or 48% and you're an apprentice and you don't use 42% or 48% and your master catches you, you're fucked, right? He's caught you in the act. He knows you're not paying attention, and you're not going to make quality liquor in the future. So little things like that become very, very practical. The yeast log that you guys mentioned, right? Yeast is one of my loves from a practical perspective. I'm no Pat Heist. I'll never be anywhere near as smart as Pat Heist is when it comes to yeast, and he's the guy that you should talk to about yeast. Absolutely. But from a practical distiller's perspective, the main job of a distiller in a distillery for years and years and years was as the yeast maker, because it was hard to get a good strain of yeast that made good quality spirits. If you're in a city, you might be lucky enough to be close to a brewer or a baker who's going to have good strain of yeast. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, you really got to get a good yeast strain that you captured from the wild, that is alcohol tolerant, that tastes good, that smells good, that has good production value to it. And you better hold on to it, and you better have backup copies of it. And for a long time, I did the Donna jug thing, right? I literally called it the Donna jug dance, because I was taking this fucking jug to and from work every day. And I'll just tell you right now, that jug that I got that Sean Stevens built, I love that thing, but it's like 30 pounds. And fuck hauling that thing back and forth every day. And then my refrigerators were all full of liquid yeast cultures, right? Because I had 7 or 8. Kim was so tired of me having yeast in the kitchen.
I remember that.
Blew a hole in the ceiling tile in the kitchen, and that was like the end of the it was done. There was no more yeast in the refrigerator, right? Which, fair enough. I probably shouldn't have been doing that anyways. But I came across, the beer brewers. That's the thing. The commercial beer brewers, the craft beer brewers, they push boundaries, and that's what I like about them, because craft distillers are just now they barely push, right? They try to push a little bit, and then they don't go far enough, in my opinion. We're going to get there in the next 10 years, though. I guarantee you that, with home distillers becoming craft distillers. So I got interested in Kveik yeast, and the fact that this yeast is literally an heirloom yeast that has been passed down for hundreds of generations. It's not just one strain, it's multiple strains. But they are strains that were used for brewing inside the malt houses and the malt kilns, where the temperature for fermentation might be 99 to 110 degrees. They're Saccharomyces cerevisiae, just like every other commercial yeast you're going to use is, but they've adapted to these high temperature, very fast, hot fermentations, and they get these crazy, you're good, fruity, floral esters that you don't get from any of the other yeasts that are out there. They're not always the best attenuated. In other words, they don't always go dry, but for a craft distiller, that's not necessarily something you have to have, and you can work towards that as well. So then I got interested in how they were maintaining them. They were literally maintaining them a couple different ways. One way was just taking the trub off the bottom of the fermentation, all the grain and the lees that fell out, taking that and drying it down and storing it away. And the other way was the yeast log, which is literally a piece of wood. Now, I usually use fruit wood because it has fruit sugars in it. I'll take a peach tree and I'll cut a limb that's maybe 3 or 4 inches long. You're all right.
Just grab some pictures, that's all.
Yeah, 2 or 3 inches around. And the more surface area it has, the more holes it has in it, the more ragged it is, the more surface area there is for that yeast. So once your fermentation gets going, after about 24 hours, you throw this yeast log in on a rope, let it set for another 24 hours, pull it out, hang it up somewhere cold and dry, where it's not going to get damp or anything, and that yeast will be there for the next time you want to use it. So I've done it that way several times. You can even freeze them if you want to, if you want to get if you're really worried about microorganisms and all that stuff. But honestly, I've never had one yet. I had one that was hanging for over a year, and I threw it and it kicked within 24 hours and did everything it was supposed to do. That's old school, low technology. Listen, people can drop in fucking yeast rooms for thousands and thousands of dollars and talk about all their fucking shiny equipment and put someone's name on it that taught them how to do it all they want to. Or you can cut a fucking branch out of your backyard and catch some yeast, right? To me, I think the branch is much cooler. Maybe it's not as much to see on tour, but it's much cooler.
Well, I know in a lot of breweries, they use like a yeast ring, kind of like this, where it's wood, like you said, surface area. It catches as much as you can. And in the past, they even used bone for something like that. But there were things in a lot of breweries in the past that it wasn't shown, but those rings were like right next to everything right there after they were already dried out. So there was like a stack of them. And it was almost something that they didn't mention because it was so on hand.
Yeah, absolutely. They just used to having it on hand and it being there and it being part of their protocols. Yeah. The other parts of it are things like not using exogenous enzymes, right? I mean, this is something that I've talked about many times, and we do use exogenous enzymes. I'm not saying that word right. Exogenous enzymes. Somebody will rip my ass eventually over that. I guarantee it. Anyways, how many distillers out there, truthfully, how many craft distillers know how to make a mash bill, not use exogenous enzymes, and actually attenuate that mash bill to make something that is worthwhile to produce as far as the amount of alcohol it's going to create? And I would stagger to bet that if you took 9 craft distillers, 10 craft distillers, 1 out of 10 might know how to do that, and they probably have a brewing background. So how are you really going to call yourself a distiller if you don't even understand the basic premise of fermentation, because you become so reliant on everything that's out there commodity wise to make whiskey nowadays, because you have no idea of where this art came from, right? Anybody can write down a mash bill that's 70% corn, 20% wheat, 10% malt. Is that enough malt to convert that mash bill efficiently? No, it's not. So
It also depends on what malt you're getting, though, to be fair.
It does, but
they've
even
made
with
a lot of
even with straight distiller's malt with that mash bill, you won't get anywhere near 100% efficiency. So
that was something I bugged the Iron Root guys about, because they used a lot of heirloom grains, and I was like, how do you know what like the diacetic power and like how much protein versus carbs you have in this? And they're like, we don't. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. All right, well, good luck. All right, yeah. Sweet.
You have to average them based on what they should be. And then, for example, right now we're doing our heirloom corn, our Amanda Palmer corn at Spirits of French Lick for our Hindostan Falls product. And, I'd set it out to be a 1075 mash bill. It's not. It's a 1068 to 1070, depending on the day, because the corn wasn't the best harvest in the world last year, and it's a little lighter than it should be. And so therefore the specific gravity is a little bit lower than it normally would be. But those are all practical distiller things, right? I mean, and the point that I'm driving at here is you take away all the modern conveniences, and there's very few people that could really make whiskey. Very, very few people that could really make whiskey. That's one of the reasons why I got into doing the heritage distilling thing, and Locust Grove with Brian Cushing, or the New Spring Mill project we're working on, because I want to be able to bring other distillers in and other people that want to learn that, and let's show them the practical ways to do it and not do it with any cheats. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't always work, right? I mean, if you do 100 mashes, you're gonna have one that fails for sure. But that's part of it. You learn from that.
Well, Mitch was mentioning that about last week when we had Edelbrand on, and when you decide to distill at such a slow rate, what did you say? You made a decision, and it has to pay off, and it did for them.
Right.
But
yeah. Right, because they distill at like a gallon an hour or something like that, which is insanely slow. Like, just for reference, Heaven Hill has 3 stills. They're distilling under 300 gallons a minute. It's because something went wrong. And they make that decision, right, because they are an immensely massive producer, and it is so economically beneficial to distill at 300 gallons a minute that, to them, it makes no sense not to. So the only reason you would sacrifice like all of that economic benefit and put in that much more work and that much more time is because it does show up in the end product quality wise.
Yep, because there's a difference.
And it does.
Yeah. And there's always going to be a place, obviously, for commodity whiskey, even in times when there's not a place for craft whiskey, at least not, on the legal side of things. It's just more a matter of making sure that people still understand. We've all heard the my grandpa, he did sugar shine thing, and he nothing new can be good, and nothing, no modern advancement has helped distillation get any better. And the thing is, they don't realize that their grandpa probably learned from somebody who worked for a small craft producer or a small craft legal distiller at one point in time and knew the right way of doing things. And they took that and they adapted it to what they had in the woods. And all these things that people are calling modern inventions. I mean, what's really modern? You look at rectification stills. You're going back prior to the 1800s. You can go all the way back to the Pistorius lens in the 1600s and get rectification. So that's some of the other practicalities too, right? What can you really do with a pot still? I got hung up on this for a long time in my career, where I'd look at a pot still and go, well, there's only so much you can do with a pot still. Either you can do single pass, which isn't very good, or you can do double pass, which I love, or you can do, triple distilling and mix various fractions, various different places. But what else can you do? Well, when you start realizing what you can really do with a pot still with various rectification technologies, whether it be line arm angles, or it be forced rectification, or it be a Carter head gin basket, or an offset gin basket, or a liquid gin basket, various retorts or thumpers, there's a lot you can do, and it's all historic. I'm fucking dying.
You've gotten so much better about this over the years.
I know. I'm like desperate to figure out. I have a mute button on my soundboard, which I love, right? I'm desperate to figure out how to hook up a foot pedal to that fucking thing so that I can I could pull a full on Alex Jones, be in the middle of a fucking rant and just be like, and then just start coughing, you know?
So when you touched on something we were talking about, coming to a limit of what you can do, and then you kind of go further with it. But have you tried stuff that you're like, all right, I got to stop doing this one? Or is there anything that you're, given how maybe things are now, whether it be available materials or whatever, you're just like, there's no way I can do that?
Oh man. So with Spirits of French Lick, I painted myself into a corner, didn't I, boys? Right? I mean, I made my own rules, which is cool. Like, it all has to be double pot distilled. Can't add anything to it other than water and barrel. Right? Occasionally we would do a rectified spirit, but that would be for like a contract spirit or something like that. That helped us get to where we are for sure. But I'm now like completely hesitant to break any of those rules, because that's, what people expect out of you. So,
hey, as long as you're like Compass Box and you put it on the bottle, I fucked with my shit on this one.
Right. Well, that's going to be the beauty of it. If I ever do anything else, it'll be breaking my own rules 100,000% because the way that I see it now, short of low rec column stills, which I still think are trash. I'm sorry, but I do. I mean, I like Kentucky bourbon whiskey just fine, and they do a fine job of it. And the low rec column still has got its place for industrialization, but that's what it is a tool of industrialization. Nothing else is off limits as far as I'm concerned, because it's all what I've learned over the years, the number of different configurations on stills I've run, which is literally probably in the thousands at this point. It's all a tool in the toolbox, right? And various different spirits may be more well represented by how those things are manipulated in different ways. Like, so take, for example, if you're playing around with, sunflower distillation, the best method I've found for that is it's a triple pot still distillation, but it's a pot still with a thumper, and you make a heads cut and you make a tails cut and you keep a hearts cut that's fairly dirty, and then you put that into a third still and redistill it with slight reflux. If you're looking at a sugar shine, I still think that a sugar shine tastes best when it's run through a pot still with a thumper. If you're looking at brandy, in my opinion, most brandies show best when they're double pot distilled in the old French method. I think that with gin and things of that nature, it very much depends on the botanicals you're using, how much of it goes into the liquid, how much of it goes into the vapor path. And I think it's of vital importance, where possible, to be able to either start off with completely clean liquor that you don't have to make any heads or tails cuts to, or you have a way to bypass the vapor around those botanicals until the heads are out of the way, so you're not losing any flavor during that distillation. And I'm been working with Wayne Herbert of Ozark Stillworks. I don't know if you guys have seen any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to come up with a whole cadre of very small distilling equipment adjustments that you can buy, whether it be reflux condensers or pot still heads with reflux condensers, or we've got a prototype of what's called an inline thumper, and then there's going to be a prototype coming of a very small home scale 3-chamber still.
That's just what I was going to ask about. So I watched that, and that was what we were talking about, was a small 3-chamber still. And since you're talking about agave spirit, and we know that's an oil sucker, man, that is, I'm intrigued. What do you think about doing an agave spirit out of a 3-chamber still?
I think it would be really cool. So agave spirits themselves are if you're distilling from syrups, you don't get nearly the stuff that you really get out of piñas, right? You're not getting the roastiness out of it, etc. But I think the interesting thing is that growth-wise, economically, last year, U.S. made agave spirits were on par as far as growth went with both tequila and mezcal, which is crazy when you think about it. But why would you? I wouldn't want to be the guy in the United States who said, this is our version of tequila or this is our version of mezcal. I would much rather be the guy in the United States who added some things to that agave syrup, made it our own, as we've always done as distillers here in the United States, and said, this is our tribute to mezcal or agave spirits. So I think the 3-chamber could play into that if you had the right ingredients that were oily enough and went along with the flavor, still maintains the characteristics of the agave, but enhance them with some other ingredients, as it were. Right. But I certainly think that there would be some levity there that you could play with for sure. I mean, I think even if you did, why not take an agave syrup and use that as the boil water for an apple mash brandy? Right. Now you've got agave and apple going into a 3-chamber, you know, and you've changed things up. You've made it your own, but you're still paying tribute to both traditions. And those traditions, I think that's what got me interested in mezcal. Is I started to see all of a sudden, like clear as day, all of a sudden one day I got interested and I was like, no, what they're doing there is exactly what was happening here in southern Indiana with the apple producers to a T, much more so than anything that was happening with grain production in Kentucky was comparable to what was happening in Indiana. So I think that would be a unique and interesting thing that you could certainly do, or mixing various different grains with agave might be cool. I think there's a lot that you can do there because you're gonna have to slap the DSS label onto it anyways. So,
sorry, that's true.
Speaking of agave spirits in America, they are wild. Hit and miss is probably a great way to put it, right? Like some of them you try and you're like, okay, yeah, no, I totally get this. Like this is a bourbon barrel agave spirit. Like that's a thing. And other ones you're like, this is alcoholic.
Yep.
So like, and it's because they're trying to make, you know, tequila or mezcal the same way they make bourbon. And it's like, no, just every, you know, things benefit from different, you know, traditions and distillation methods.
Yeah.
You're not set up for it.
Well, it hasn't found itself yet. I think it will. And people just have to figure out how to manipulate that agave syrup and make it its own thing and use it with other things, I think, as much as anything. And it's the same thing, like some of these things, like why haven't we, you know, I know absinthe really just got legalized, which is not really because there's no category for absinthe, right? It's a DSS again, but we can call it fancifully, we can call it absinthe. We've not Americanized absinthe yet. We have bastardized the hell out of gin, but we've not Americanized absinthe yet. Why not? Were you scared of it, or what's the, you know? I mean, there's a little bit of that out there. I did a purple absinthe with Jim Martin that's coming out here shortly in New Orleans, but not nearly as much as we could have. Or even aquavit. Why not Americanize aquavit? That's another cool thing you can do. This is where the next wave of craft distillers that pay attention to history and home distilling and these protocols, this is where they're going to be cool to watch, because I think there's a number of things happening right now with spirits in the United States. All the big guys are getting bigger, and there's more and more big ones opening, and they're all making a lot of bourbon. And those four, I don't know what they're planning on, but those foreign markets are not there. The population growth isn't there to sustain it 20 years out. Just not. You don't have replacement population. Yeah. You don't have replacement population in China. Where's it going to go, guys? It doesn't exist. It's not there. So, and they did this before Prohibition, and they hurt themselves then as well, and they're going to do it again. But the craving for spirits is not going to go away. The interest in spirits isn't going to go away. But I do think that on a craft level, you better be able to switch gears real fast, and you better be able to do really cool small projects. And I think that the modern home distillers, and I'm not talking the guys that are, you know, nothing wrong with being a moonshiner. I'm talking about the people who really identify as home distillers. They've got all the cool toys, all the cool tricks that they can scale up, that they've been doing at home in their basement or in their garage, making shit that might seem wild and crazy right now, that 10 years from now, you're going to wander into it and be like, holy fuck, that is really good. Because they put the time and effort into it to figure it out.
That's what innovation is. Excuse me. All right. Well, hey, we've had John for an hour. Mr.
Look at
Alan
that.
Bishop.
Rambled for a whole hour
Right.
without drinking.
Without drinking. Well, we'd have been a 2-hour show had you been drinking.
Or any major rants, or any character changes. Didn't change character one time.
No,
We're
but
all-
you do have a
That's
sweet
'cause you're
shirt on.
already-
We're all grown up as a show. Look at this.
I was about to say, you're already the cream of the crop. You don't need to change characters. There you go.
Yeah, if I could pull the Duffy Wodes voice right now, I
Yeah.
would, but it's questionable. It's questionable.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or, yeah, as Randy said, the cream rises to the top.
The best part is how many fucking little cream things he had because he kept throwing them over his shoulder. He's like the top, and he's pulls one out of his fanny pack. He's got another one. I'm like, oh fuck, what are you, Rob? You know, like take every one from the diner this morning before the promo. Like, oh, hold on, I need these. I got a promo to do. Jam them in the fanny pack and take off.
Right.
Sorry, it's just the weirdest. Like I love that promo, but at the same time, it's like a very weird thing to watch. Like I don't know. That's a whole nother show. We'll have to come back for a wrestling show.
We got to do a wrestling show because, yeah, it has to happen, man. It has to happen. Honestly, what we should do is just pick a random pay-per-view and do a live running commentary.
Oh, Lord.
Is what
Okay.
we should do.
I haven't done anything like. I'd have to get into the new people. But yeah.
No, you don't, because it's all shitty. It all sucks. That's what's going to be
like,
what's fun about
we
it.
could go back and do like WrestleMania 3 or something. Like,
We could do that too, yeah.
holy fuck, then I would be into it.
Right?
So,
Do a good classic.
if
Hey,
you really want to go,
Alan-
But
Oh, go ahead. Go, Mitch.
I was going to say, if you really want to do something wild, get like PlayStation 2 SmackDown video games. Have us all drink and play those. Because, in my opinion, that's peak wrestling right there.
Yes.
Like
Right.
there's no promos, there's no whatever. You get to make up whatever storyline you want. The characters were amazing, and just alcohol and wrestling games, I think, go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Absolutely.
I wish I still had my old PlayStation because I had built a wrestling character that had the body of Kane, but then you could pick their entrance music and how they walked and everything else. But he had the body of Kane, and I can't remember some of the other details. But he carried a mop, and how he walked down to the ring was he sashayed.
Right,
Well
so
played.
good.
Well played.
Just peak wrestling right there, in my opinion.
And
Perfect.
yeah, Alan, you can go back and look at it, or we'll copy it in the link. But Emily, because she's Emily, she found probably what you're looking for.
Oh, Emily, you're awesome. Yes, I need that. I need one I can hook up. I need to get a like less shitty webcam too, because this one's terrible, and hook it up at the same time. So that way when I'm dying, you also can't see me have the heart attack as I'm having the heart attack.
No, that's the fun, damn it.
Right?
Don't ruin that.
I'm over here turning red. My eyes are about to pop out of my head.
Yeah.
It's a whole
And
thing.
we hear you eat. We hear you. See that if we had eaten the McRib and Malort and you had that, you just would have had this black screen. We wouldn't have been able to hear that outside the confines of your house.
See, there's Americanized absinthe right there.
I thought you were using the McRib to make American Pachuga.
Don't you
Just
challenge me to a fucking good time, buddy.
No, I'm super excited if that happened. I would
Right.
100% be. I'd be one of those guys in the distillery in line. Like, I heard it's releasing today. I beat you here. Would you like a donut?
McDonald's
Americans
is
would
gonna-
do like a wine finished Pachuga or a wine finished absinthe.
You just
I'm
put the
sorry,
McRib right in the barrel.
It's a McRib.
Right in the
there you
barrel.
go. Oh,
It'd be interesting
a
to see.
It's not
McDonald's
going
grease
through you
filled
though.
Pachuga.
It's when the McRib goes through you is the problem. So maybe just it not that. I don't know. I'm just saying maybe.
You know why they only offer the McRib once a year, don't you?
The machine for squeezing them breaks.
No,
I mean,
no. It's
I-
because
I
they
know-
only wash the fucking condiment dispensers once a year at McDonald's, and that barbecue sauce is made up of all the leftover fucking ketchup and mustard that's stuck in the fucking dispenser all year with a little bit of dishwater. Don't let anything go to waste, ever.
Kind of ruining special sauce at County Stadium for me.
Right?
'Cause now that you think about it, like it does have that appearance, damn.
Destroyed it for him.
Leftovers.
Right? Right.
But all right, well, I think we'll probably be calling our show here in a little bit. But before we go, I want to tell you about some of our upcoming shows. And if you're cool, we're gonna have you back on again. We like having you on. We don't have to talk. We can talk more about this. We can go deeper. We can go talk about whatever, Alan. I just like having
bullshit
a
all day
drink,
long. You know how I am. I love coming on with you guys. So
my wife's gonna love it when I'm done. I've been drinking. All right, but next week, Mitch, you're taking us down a path of wood influence. Are you not?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love talking about wood and what it does to, things, perhaps spirits, right? No, but basically, right, I used to be a cooper. I was a distiller. I know a fair amount about what barrels and wood does to spirits. And the fun part is it does basically three things. It can remove flavors, it can add flavors, or it can change flavors. So start off with removing flavors, right? If you start off with the wrong white dog or clear spirit when you go into a barrel, it won't be good. But that being said, if you start off with like Elderbrand, my brain will not pronounce the people we had on last week. Edelbrand. Thank you. So, right, like they make their cuts and they choose very specifically because they are not going into a barrel. And the barrel does so much to clean up kind of messy spirits. And it's kind of one of those, in my opinion, like overly hoppy beers. Like hops can hide a multitude of sins. Barrels can hide a multitude of sins. So they remove a lot of off flavors, but they also remove a lot of good flavors. So you have to learn how to balance that. So part one will be learning, like what flavors it removes, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Then adding flavors, right? Everybody talks, you can taste oak, but there's, a chemical breakdown of what it puts in there. Like what is an oak lactone? What does it taste like? All that fun stuff. And then it changes flavors, right? Because barrels oxidize. And that's really one of the things that you want a barrel specifically for. Otherwise, you just put it in a plastic container with oak in it and then seal it up so you wouldn't have any evaporation. And that's where like Scotch and Armagnacs and all those things really sing, is through those oxidization, those esters and all that fun stuff. So it's got some samples I sent out today that hopefully show those. Tried to keep it at 5 or less
per show. He's got us on 4 shows. You should have seen the table. It is very similar to what's behind you. When I saw that, Mitch is asking, "How many am I supposed to put on?" I'm like,
I've seen how
5 is doable. If we do any more than that, we're probably drunk by an hour and a half. That's just.
I've seen how Mitch rolls. I've seen the trunk of his vehicle before, buddy. I know what's up there.
So the thing that saved it was I bought a 30-pack of sample bottles, and I had to split it between 2 of y'all. So it's like, okay, so you're not getting more than 15. So all right, that's the cutoff.
Very nice. Okay, so Mitch, that's next. That's May 1st. Is that what it is? Or is it? Holy goodness!
Parade, 1st of May.
Time is just flying by, and then the week after that, we are having Fred Swanson and Adam Casey on for our annual discussion about Distill America. This is their
annular.
Yeah, well, that's what
awesome.
happens. You start me off with bottle pulls. What do you expect? For our annual discussion with them, because this is their 15th year hosting Distill America, and we believe it is one of the premier shows and whiskey events that you should try to fit into your calendar, not only because of the 88 plus vendors. It's about all the spirits, not just whiskey. Like one of the main things they discussed when they very first started it was, how do you know we are a success? Well, when we have 3 whiskey drinkers or 4 blocking a path of people trying to get through discussing vodka. They did that in year 3. So that's they hit their goals. They aim not just for big distilleries, but also craft distilleries. It's a wide variety of things to try. And I definitely think you should go, but All right, all three of you have a fucking smirk on your face. So
I'm just wondering if we can talk Edelweiss into doing an annular release.
no, well, that's both of us. You know, are you gonna combo both our mistakes? So it'll be.
I don't think I could say those two words together more than once without I couldn't do it. I'm surprised I got it out there. I'm surprised I made a joke out of it.
I got it out to fuck with you. I appreciate it.
Put maximum effort.
So, Mike, you might be joking, but yeah, like that last comment. So my girlfriend Morgan, yeah, like I don't know how to make friends, so I just show up with alcohol as an adult, right? Like, it's like, hey, you seem cool. You want to be friends? I don't know. I got a trunk full of alcohol if you want to like.
As long as it's not an unmarked white van, and
or to be honest, some of the painted vans you saw from the 80s and 90s, they're questionable today. You know, like though the murals were good, it's a whole different.
I don't know. If someone pulled up in front of my house right now with one of those vans with shed carpet, I would 100% go for a ride.
Especially if it had the reclining chair.
That's right.
Swivel
captain
chairs.
Yeah, the captain chairs, the swivel captain chairs. Yep. You need all four. The driver even.
Hair of the dog blasting out the window. Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
So, all right. No. So that is going to be on May 8th, and on the 15th, we are going to be having Ben. This guy who used to be on the show a long time ago. He's going to come back.
Is it Ben or Benjamin?
He's still out there?
The country ham. Yeah, he's out there.
That's original artwork that's titled Broken Promises. So
I thought maybe that was like footage of him that you captured in the wild, like somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
no, it's like my Campbell's soup one. There's 8 more images. I'm just not showing them yet.
That's actually a collage that I'm gonna put on my wall. So,
I bet if we looked hard enough on the internet, there's somewhere that would print milk cartons.
Oh, well, that's probably true. But see, he's gonna be back. Josh Galladay from Ironroot is going to be coming on that, and Ed, who is of the Rock Gut Review, but who has been working in distilling. The distillery has actually been purchased and is changing names, so I'm not saying peep about what it is until they've decided on a new name. But they'll all be coming on the 15th to discuss whiskey fans who just ended up being in the whiskey industry, primarily the distilling field. So,
and Mitch was one of those people as well.
Mm-hmm. No, he was already in it.
Yeah. I became a whiskey fan after I became a Cooper. Before I was a Cooper, I just drank beer.
All right. Well, fuck you then.
I'm like a hipster. Like I only get involved in things after they're popular, man. Like, I like beer. It was popular. Became a Cooper. Started drinking whiskey. It was already popular. Just finding what I'm hitching my wagon to.
You're not supposed to tell people that. You're supposed to tell them that you're OG.
Oh,
as hell.
Original. Represent.
That's right. That's right. Where's that fucking toboggan that's out of season?
What?
Oh,
yeah. I mean, in the garage.
It doesn't count for you guys, Patrick.
The snow just melted last week.
It's cold there forever.
I gotta say, like Bourbon House being from Wisconsin hurts a little bit. Like that's having like a band called Horse Barn out of Idaho. You're like, no, that's that. Come on, man. Like you gotta be from somewhere else.
You deserve them. They just don't have them. You know what it is? You gotta have some love in other states.
We lost. Whatever.
On a scallop ranch. Where is it? Ohio.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for stopping with us on this evening, tonight. Mike, Mitch, Alan, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it, and thanks for hanging out. Thank you, everyone in the chat. Stop in next week as Distill America gets closer. We might have a few updates, as it does for maybe some things going on. We're going to catch into that stream next week. So it was good seeing everyone. Remember, it's not the size of the den that matters. It's the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.